Welcome to the Energy Conversations podcast, your go-to source for unpacking the complexities of the South African energy sector. My name is Fezile Dhlamini. I will be your guide, and every 2 weeks, we will be on a journey of bridging the knowledge gap surrounding South Africa's energy sector and the transition to a low-carbon economy. Welcome back to the Energy Conversations podcast, where we break down the complexities of the South African energy sector into digestible insights and explore pivotal topics shaping the future of energy in South Africa and beyond. I am your host, Fezile Dhlamini, and today we will be discussing the future of mobility and the opportunities that are presented by electric vehicles for South Africans. I am honored to be joined by a panel of specialists who will be assisting us in unpacking this topic. Joining us is Nathan Fredericks from the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa, Ndia Magadagela from Everlectric, Winstone Jordaan from Gridcars, Fezile Dhlamini from Green Scooter, and Asanda Mzinyati from the Automotive Industry Development Centre. Before we dig into today's topic, I'd like to ask each of our guests to briefly introduce themselves and share a bit about the work that they're currently doing in the electric vehicle industry, and also what excites you most about the future of EVs. Winston, if I can start with you, please.
Thank you. So thank you very much. What excites me about I think it's really just about being at the start of a big evolution. You know, the electric vehicle evolution is something that's really going to change the way we look at things. Our children and let's say kids in there that are less than 10 years old now are going to grow up not understanding, you know, why did you ever want to have anything but an electric car? Because when they start looking at the advantages and they see what it is, it's almost as silly as what we might feel when, you know, if we were talking to our great-grandparents, you think, yeah, why were you riding a horse if you had an option of a car? You know, and I think that's the difference that we'll see. It's really game-changing, and it's flexible. I think it brings us so many more options to the table. You know, with a petrol vehicle, you can't put in petrol at home. Well, not unless you kept it in a drum. But whereas here, you can actually make your own solo at home. You can do that. It gives us so many more options on how this technology will be taken forward and how we can use that. And I think that, to me, is the exciting part about where electric mobility is going. So it puts a lot of power in our hands. It really opens up a lot of opportunities for innovation, which means we're able to build new businesses and start up new things. And at the same time, this is a future technology which will be something in 50 years' time. When we look back, it'll almost be a no-brainer. Why did they take so long to make those decisions? And I really believe that's what drives a lot of what I'm interested in and drives a lot of the industry.
Thank you for that, Winston. If you could also just briefly introduce yourself and share a bit about the work that you've been doing in the electric vehicle industry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I've been working in the industry probably since 2000 is I think where the starting point was. So a lot longer than what most people might realize. Even electric was popular, but you know, I was always passionate about electric vehicles and where the technology would go. So I spent about 10 years trying to actually design and build cars. And I say trying, we were relatively successful. We had quite a few prototype vehicles out. We had, you know, we were looking at going forward and taking those to production. But as we started looking at it, we realized that you really needed deep pockets in order to be able to fund a vehicle development process. Unfortunately for us, you know, every funding source we approached ultimately really just treated it like any other business. They weren't seeing where the innovation is. And meaning, when I say treated like any other business, they're looking for a proper business case that says, where's your offtake agreement? If you can't prove sales, you can't do this. But when you're driving new technology, there's got to be some level of risk in how you take that forward. So we were never able to raise funding in the early days. It meant that by about 2012, we then pivoted over to charging and said, let's rather let the automotive industry develop the vehicles. And what we will do is then build the charging infrastructure and build that energy resilience around that and drive that whole system side of it. So we put a huge amount of focus then into developing both the hardware as well as the systems that would be used to manage billing systems, manage roaming, manage maintenance, do all of the mapping system. So bringing that entire ecosystem together, that we could drive that forward.
Thank you very much for that intro, Winston. Fezile, if I could ask you to please briefly introduce yourself and share about your work in the electric vehicle industry, and also what excites you about the future of EVs.
All right. Good afternoon. So my name is Fezile Dhlamini. I'm the founder of Green Scooter. We started the company about 8 years ago, and there was just one mission, which is to build products that people love. So when we started at the time, it was purely just to solve a problem, which is transportation as a service, business model innovation, and clean energy. So over time, what we've done is we've grown from being just an automotive company to becoming a tech company. So we found ourselves helping companies as well to galvanize and to try and find strategic ways of implementing green technologies and the like. And over the past 8 years, I mean, we've been the first and the only 100% Black-owned youth company. Where in the 100 years of South Africa's automotive industry, this never existed. So we've been breaking the status quo, so which is part of the excitement. We've been breaking down barriers because it's all for the sake of building tomorrow, using our own cosmic tapestry, which we believe in, that will be best applied for everyone else across the globe. So, with that, it's being mostly realistic with ourselves, making sure that we're also sending the letter back down to help empower other people who look like me as I represent them within this particular economic sector.
Thank you very much for that, Fezile. Nathan, if I could ask you to briefly introduce yourself and share a bit about your work in the electric vehicle industry, and also what excites you most about the future.
Thank you, and glad to be here as well. I think, EVs are exciting. The future is exciting for it. What we're witnessing right now, just the sheer pace of the transition, and then, where I sit within the IDC, the potential impact for, economic development, job creation is very exciting with this transition. I mean, we're seeing this transition unfolding continentally, globally as well, and taking on different forms of adoption. And although electric vehicles have been around for close to 100 years, I mean, the electric vehicle came before the internal combustion vehicle. The real adoption and the scaling of this is only really happening now in sort of our lifetime. And I think it's quite exciting. Where I sit, I'm from the IDC. I'm a senior industry development planner in the CEO's office. And my involvement from that perspective is twofold. At IDC, I am responsible for developing our automotive and new energy vehicle value chain strategy, and then coordinating the implementation of that across the IDC, across our vertical business units, etc. And then secondly, my involvement in the JETP, the Just Energy Transition investment plan, and then the implementation plan with a specific focus on new energy vehicles. And then IDC as well is currently the lead institutions for the implementation plan for electric vehicles, where we are currently sort of busy setting up the implementation office for JET at the IDC.
Thank you very much for that, Nathan. Asanda, if I can bring you into the conversation, if you could briefly introduce yourself and share a bit more about your work in the industry and what excites you most about the future of EVs.
Thank you very much. It's very fascinating that it's like electric vehicles are a myth. I've got 30 years in the engineering space, having worked for Mercedes-Benz, Ford, and VW. We've been using electric vehicles. And it's not like as the South African market, it's something new. If you remember the heists that we're using in the factory, those were electric vehicles. And for those that play golf, the golf carts, those are electric vehicles. We just put them in a nicer shell now. So we are ready for this market. To introduce myself, I'm Asanda Mzinyati. I'm the head of business development at AIDC, which incorporates marketing, events management, stakeholder management, facilities, and sales. And I'm very passionate about this topic because before the end of this year, we're going to be hosting together in partnership with CSIR a conference where we're inviting international role players, Monroe, who actually do the research on the background of electrical vehicles. We're in partnership with the Grid Cars, which is Winstone, where we were looking at the network of South Africa as to how can we ensure that the electric vehicle market grows. So we looked at the network as to where are the gaps, and the Eastern Cape government took it up and they implemented it. Because what was happening was that if you are traveling from Gauteng to East London, you'll be forced to drive via PE, because on the N6, which is from Bloemfontein, Alwan North, Queenstown, there was no charging station. So you would have to go via Port Elizabeth to get to East London. So as the AIDC, we're also partnered with ABP, which is Berlin organization that is more of a combination of NAMSA and NACAM together with the universities. Because what we are looking at is to how do we bridge the gap when it comes to the skills development? It's fine. The vehicles can be produced here, but who's going to maintain them? So as the AIDC, we are putting ourselves in the forefront to say, we've got a learning center, we've got a training center. Let's develop these skills. So we are partnering, we're exporting those skills, we're bringing back to our shores. Fezile is here, and we've got engagements with his company together with the CSIR. So as the AIDC, I wouldn't say we're advanced, but we are playing in the space.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Ndia, I'd like to end off with you, the rose amongst the thorns in today's conversation, and ask you to please briefly introduce yourself and just share more around the work that you're currently doing in the electric vehicle industry, and also sharing with us what is it that excites you about the future of electric vehicles.
Thank you so much, Thokozile. My name is Ndia Magadagela. I am the co-founder of Everlectric. Everlectric leases electric vehicles to the logistics industry. So we provide a full maintenance lease solution where we include the vehicle, the charging, the maintenance, as well as everything that a fleet manager would need to transition their fleet to electric. So we're very much excited about the industry because with anything new comes really a lot of opportunities. I think we have a real opportunity here for job creation. We've got opportunity here for investment to be coming into a new sector. So there's a lot of spin-offs of this industry being new to South Africa, and we can certainly learn from other countries. Our excitement is with the opportunities that come with the development of this new industry in South Africa.
Thank you so much for that. Let's dig in, or let's kick off with the discussion. And Asanda, you've spoken quite a bit about the AIDC, which is the Automotive Industry Development Centre. Could you maybe just for our listeners and our viewers that maybe have not come across the AIDC, maybe just share a bit more around what is the AIDC, and also maybe just touching on some of the specific initiatives, or going into just a little bit more detail around the specific initiatives that AIDC has, and the partnerships that you believe would make a difference and really create a conducive environment for electric vehicle adoption in South Africa.
All right. Thank you, Thokozile. We are a government institution mandated by the Gauteng government to transform the automotive industry. And when I'm saying transforming the automotive industry, it means that Black people play a primary role in the value chain of the auto sector, meaning that it doesn't mean if you've got a purchase order, you're going to be supplying or doing gardening. But we are, as the AIDC, and doing the transformation, ensuring that Black people are part of the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, and which add value into the production of vehicles. And we're doing that successfully. And when it comes to the EV space, we are part of the role players that are leading because we are looking into the future. Remember at AIDC, a technical center, which is more having a college in our institution. So what it means is that we need to get experienced technology that can actually assist the industry. Hence, we've got the relationships with the likes of ABB in Germany, that we can bring those skills and we can actually enforce them into our training center. And we are working with the likes of the MIACITA.
Thank you very much, Asanda, and really highlighting the foundational work that's really being done by the AIDC, and really the focus being on a transformative mandate to really ensure that the industry is inclusive. And I mean, there are challenges in the difficulties in becoming a tier 1 or tier 2 supplier in the automotive industry, and it's quite important that this work is being done. Nathan, I wanted to bring you into the conversation and looking at the bigger picture. How is the electric vehicle industry expected to impact the broader economy, the broader South African economy rather, and particularly in terms of job creation and industrial growth? And what role is the IDC playing in facilitating this impact?
Those are very good and pertinent sort of questions. We can't have this conversation without touching on, the automotive industry, which we have in South Africa, which is, quite a significant contributor to jobs, direct, indirect, induced. I think in total, close to 120,000 jobs created. Indirectly, it's been estimated close to 500,000 jobs. So it's quite a big contributor to jobs and manufacturing jobs, exports as well, contribution to exports. We export in excess of, I think, 2/3 of the vehicles we produce in South Africa to the likes of the EU, the UK, the USA, etc. And then obviously its contribution to GDP. And then we have quite a deep supply chain. If you look at it in terms of the components we produce that go into our cars, on average, the industries are maintaining levels of about 40% local contribution, the local content in terms of the vehicles we produce, although it varies between OEM and then we have 7 global OEMs in South Africa assembling at a CKD level, so complete knockdown level, with 2 new ones. One's already set up doing SKD, a semi-knockdown. And then, of course, with Stellantis also coming to South Africa and setting up here. So we have quite a significant auto industry that's definitely being impacted by this transition from internal combustion engines and the manufacturing of that to manufacturing new energy vehicles, which includes hybrids, it includes battery electric vehicles or pure electric vehicles, also includes fuel cell vehicles and plug-in hybrids as well. And that industry has been driven by global forces. Legislation in major export markets, etc., and in response to what's happening in China. And I think that is something to bring in here, that what China's done is scale electric vehicles. And it's thanks to them that we're at this level now, but it's been very aggressive in terms of doing that for its local market for various reasons, and then starting to export vehicles into other markets as well. And China's been doing that for the last decade, investing in its industry, supporting the shift thereof, and moving the sort of, if you want to look at electric vehicles, and in terms of what lens we use to look at it. Obviously, you started off, and I think one of Winstone, for example, mentioned it, around innovation and bringing new technology to the market. And then the conversation shifted towards sustainability and decarbonization. And then obviously, thanks to China and what we're seeing with the scale economies, you're now looking at it from a purely operational and profitability perspective. And the impact that has on, for example, operational profitability, total cost of ownership, and really improving the value proposition of that, which creates new opportunities. And that's at least where we see it as well, not just from a cost curve perspective, but perhaps from a component perspective. If you bring in things like the battery element to it and the battery value chain as well, and we're seeing what's happened with the decline in component costs, batteries, electric drivetrains, overall cost of electric vehicles coming down to an extent reaching price parity with in some instances, although it'll take a few years to reach, complete sort of effective parity if you bring in all the other elements to that as well. But I think, when we talk about impact, I always think of, it's only possible until it's done. And you only really see the impact when you see the adoption on the ground. And then you start making, informed decisions using local data. I think there's been a lot of initial fears around the impact and assumptions around it's going to be positive, negative, etc. We're seeing that, once you start with the adoption and you start seeing the data and you're seeing the potential, impacts, not just the making of the vehicles, etc., but all the side stream activities. For example, infrastructure is an example of that, with charging infrastructure, which then leads to new opportunities for value creation. And so there's definitely potential long-run impacts and positive long-run impacts in terms of job creation, economic impact for this transition. And we're seeing this not just from a component perspective, but, if you look across the continent and you see, what people mainly use for mobilities, which is two-wheeler motorcycles across the continent. And that is an opportunity that we're seeing where potentially you could create linkages between the South Africa automotive supply chain, component suppliers, and our manufacturing capability, and then linking that to the demand we're seeing in the rest of the continent, and potentially leveraging off the Africa Free Trade Agreement, where potentially you could do two-wheeler, kits in South Africa from scratch, export them to countries where we're seeing huge demands for two-wheelers, whether it's Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, etc., where they could assemble those kits, etc., and really create real integration at a regional value chain level as well. In terms of what IDC is doing in terms of facilitating the impact, IDC is a development finance institution, which, as a development finance institution, we have a mandate to support industrialization through investments. We invest in projects, we invest in businesses. We have a dedicated automotive business unit that looks at automotive and supporting the OEMs and component manufacturers, as well as looking at other transport equipment as well. And then we also play a role that other DFIs typically don't play in terms of supporting project development. So if you have a project where you need to undertake studies, for example, scoping studies, feasibility studies, and taking that project through those stage gates all the way to bankable feasibility, the IDC can or has the capabilities to invest alongside you on a risk-sharing basis, and then essentially take that project with you through the various stages as well. And then, of course, IDC's involvement in the just energy transition. I think there's a real opportunity to leverage off JET, particularly the NEV chapter, given IDC is going to be the home for the implementation office, where we're setting up the secretariat. We'll be coordinating activities across various stakeholders, whether it's public or private stakeholders, but also financial actors, local and international, given the interest from international funders in JET and supporting that. And I think, that creates this vested interest in supporting this industry, which could assist in potentially seeing initiatives and projects in what we call like public transport, logistics, things like shared infrastructure, and scaling those opportunities by attracting investments. Because it's really only when you start scaling those up, you see the impact in terms of jobs and economic development.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Thank you for that. and really highlighting the economic potential of the EV industry. And I also like that you've touched on adoption, because at the end of the day, there has to be that mindset shift, or there has to be that move by businesses, by individuals, to actually move to electric vehicles. And I'd imagine that there are some specific challenges that businesses would face in adopting electric vehicles. Ndia, I'd like to bring you into the conversation and really just to share from your experience at Everlectric, and just sharing around what have been the primary challenges that businesses face when transitioning to electric fleets, and how have you been able to assist them as Everlectric to navigate these challenges?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. So our typical client is concerned with two things highly. I think, first of all, they are concerned with the rising cost of fuel, so they would like to decrease the cost of fuel on their income statement. But secondly, they have made ESG commitments. They are committed to going green, and they are looking for solutions that can help them to do exactly that. And in transitioning their fleet, then they are met with a couple of challenges. Firstly, they are met with the challenge of, is there a fit for purpose vehicle that is manufactured in South Africa that they can then use in their daily operations in the commercial sense? I think when Nathan was talking about the adoption, there is an pure interest, and people are willing to transition, but then they ask themselves these questions, and those are the things that sort of hold them back. And then secondly, above, if they can get a vehicle in the country, they will be worried about, but can I do my daily operations with 100% operational uptime without running out of charge? Where do I charge? So those are some of the questions that they're asking themselves. But they're certainly also asking themselves about the security of energy and how can they charge their vehicles optimally. So how we then take those challenges and produce a solution as Everlectric is then we provide them with an electric vehicle as a service solution, where instead of having to worry about where to get this vehicle and it's going to cost me more because of the punitive import duties that are levied on these vehicles, then the client or the consumer can then say, I will lease this vehicle, so I will not have to put down the capital, the upfront capital to do that. But on top of that, I will also be provided with a charger. And if that charger is not necessarily the one that is provided by Everlectric, it will be the one that Winstone has provided, for instance. And also we also provide them with the maintenance of the vehicles, meaning that they don't then have to worry about, where do I service this vehicle? What is the useful life of this vehicle? So we've put together the solution in that way to solve the problem that they have. And what we have seen on the ground, to your question, Thokozile, is that they are able to save, if they are doing a certain number of kilometers, even at the worst of all the parameters, being the cost of the vehicle and all of the other things that I've mentioned, they're able to save, but also they are saving carbon emissions. So these vehicles will save them 1 ton of emissions per vehicle per month. So that is how Everlectric is looking at the adoption. And I think we saw the commercial sector as a low-hanging fruit to adoption. And we know that once all these issues are solved, it's not if the transition will happen, it's when it happens.
Thank you very much for that, Ndia, and really also bringing in a critical piece of the puzzle, which is the charging infrastructure. And Winstone, I'd like to bring you into this conversation with Gridcars, so to speak, leading the charge on this aspect, and just hear from you, what are the most significant challenges you faced in expanding EV charging infrastructure in South Africa, and how have you managed to address these?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting ones that a lot of people don't think of, and that is that when we started with this, we had a fairly, I'm going to say it was a difficult choice, and I'll explain why I say that. And that is, we had to decide between installing chargers where we know chargers are going to be popular, Now, if you ask me where a charge is popular, well, it's the central part of Cape Town, it's Sandton, and it's someplace in Menlyn. You know, there's the 3 popular areas. So in theory, I should have put 20 or 30 charges in just those 2 areas. But that would not have served the industry in any form. So the second part of that challenge was, do we then put down charges where they are needed for a person in order to be able to drive long distance, for example? So we made that decision, and we call it the coverage decision. So we made the decision to install chargers and to create coverage across the country. Unfortunately, that's, you know, an accountant would tell you that's not a very good business decision, because firstly, people travel a lot less than what they travel to Sandton and need to charge in Sandton. So if I put a charger down in Sandton, I'd get 10 or 20 times the use of a charger that I put in Lanesburg, for example. But if I don't have a charger in Lanesburg, I can't drive to Cape Town. In fact, not just that, I need to have one in Lanesburg, in Beaufort West, in Bloemfontein, in Colesberg, in Ventersburg. And if I don't have every single one of those chargers, you cannot drive to Cape Town. And it was a very difficult decision in the beginning, but we decided if we didn't do that, then we would not be opening or doing the industry any favors. So, and if you look at what that looks like today, then the only chargers out on the highways predominantly, in words 95%, is grid cast chargers. Everybody else who started to enter the charging space has gone for the easy ones. They've gone and put ones in Sandton, and they've put ones in the central part of Cape Town, because that's where you can make money. And I think that to us was one of the most difficult things, is that we felt that you have to make a decision in the favor of the industry. If you're not going to be doing that, then all you're going to be doing is trying to leverage where the money is, but not in any way contributing towards opening up the industry for people. Obviously, it has played very much to our favor in that, you know, people who are traveling long distance now really understand what the reliability is and why you need those chargers there. But mostly when you talk about inner city chargers, people really charge at home, or they, like with the case of Everlectric, they charge at the depot where their vehicles are. You know, so they're not necessarily needing to charge on the long distance ones. So it was a bold decision, and I will definitely say one of the ones that really took most of our, you know, of the drive as a business to look and say, guys, we have to do this. This is the only way we establish an industry. If we do anything else, we will not be establishing an industry. We will literally just be looking and saying, where do we make money in this business? And I think that was the first thing. Beyond that, I really believe, and I've said this a few times recently to people, the biggest challenge we faced is bad communication. And I hope that bad communication is not on our part. We do our best to communicate clearly. But there's often very, very bad communication in the media coming out of the media, the way the media portrays electric vehicles, the way they approach electric vehicles. You know, and I can give examples of where journalists, for example, may not have a e-mobility account or a charger at their home, and then they write a story about electric vehicles stating, oh, it would be nice, I would buy an electric car if there was a DC charger close to my house. But an actual EV driver who has an EV in his garage or a charger in his garage, he would say, I never charge at a DC close to my house. Why would I do that when I can charge for much cheaper at home? You know, so there's a total mismatch between that. And the problem is that message gets out wrongly, that people then are looking and saying, oh, wait a minute, the media is saying we shouldn't have an electric vehicle if we don't have a DC charger close to our house. And therefore they try not to buy an electric vehicle because they don't see a DC charger close to their house, not realizing they would have charged at home and would never need a DC charger close to their house. I always say that the DC charger I've charged the most at is Harry Smith. I mean, that's 300 kilometers from my house. And that's exactly because that's sort of the gap. And that would be the area I travel mostly to when I travel long distance. So I think there's a lot of these misunderstandings people have, and those translate to difficulties in the industry because now we're not getting sales. So our biggest need is for the OEMs, for the people who own vehicles and have vehicles, to sell those vehicles and get those vehicles into the market. You know, they should be the ones driving that message, and driving a clear message that charging will be taken care of. In other words, we will build the infrastructure as the vehicles come. And in many cases, we are building the infrastructure well ahead of those vehicles coming. So I think that, you know, that we've established that. So that to me is the one challenge. We can talk about challenges of things like power at a particular site. And I want to be clear, it's power, not energy. So where we really do have enough energy in this country. The challenge we face is having the right amount of power at the right time. And with EV charging, we often need fairly high power when we charge in. But the question has to be asked, did you need to charge at that time? You know, so I could stop at, let's say I go and stop at the Mall of Africa and I plug it in and I'm now going to charge. Did I really need to charge at that time? Or did I just charge because it was convenient? And I think this is where the smart systems come into it. And Gridcars is really making a big drive around building that infrastructure. So you can plug your car in all the time, but it'll only start the charge if you need to charge. In other words, understanding what your needs are and your habits are. We should not be charging if we don't need to. And if we don't need to charge fast, so for example, and I made the mistake this morning, I plugged in this morning at the office and I plugged in on a DC charger, which filled the car in about 25 minutes. The car was full and the car probably stood in the DC charger for another hour before I went and moved it. But in actual fact, because I was at the office for 4 hours, I could have just as easily plugged in on one of the slower chargers and just left it standing there and trickling at a charge level. But instead, I took a nice big spike out of the charging regime, where a more astute way of charging would have left that spike for other people to charge who genuinely needed that charge. So it's about bringing smart technology to the market and understanding how that's going to go. I am absolutely of the opinion that we need, well, let me just make this statement because I'm sure people are busting to ask the question, and that is, you know, is Eskom a problem? Eskom is not a problem. Okay, the problem is we've got to manage our charging smartly. Eskom has the power to deliver that we need. Yes, they have some challenges and they need to fix those challenges. But overall, they can deliver enough power or enough energy to probably charge between 1 and 2 million electric vehicles without there being any impact on the grid. And I think people don't understand that. The perception is that, you know, if all cars were electric, they would think that Eskom has to have 10 times more power. And that's not the case. If all 12 million cars in South Africa became electric, Eskom would only have to produce about 12% more power. So it's a tiny fraction of what that power is. And as we grow, and as we grow our renewable energy base, and as we grow all of these other energy bases, and as we solve our energy challenges, we will easily meet those requirements. Eskom will not be our limiting factor when it comes to putting in electric vehicles. Sorry, I gave some solutions and problems.
No, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Winston. And really highlighting, obviously, the importance of having the appropriate infrastructure. But I also like the fact that you're taking a longer term view. So it's that generational thinking of saying, I'm not trying to just solve for the now of getting as many charges as I can. I'm trying to grow and expand the industry. And I think a key component or a key element of the industry would be localizing or manufacturing some components in South Africa so that we are able to have a more broad-based approach in empowering a broader community as we grow this industry. And Fezile, I'd like to bring you in here and specifically with the work that Green Scooter has been doing and your approach of actually designing and developing your own components. Can you share more around, you know, what have been some of the challenges with this approach and any breakthroughs that you've then encountered on your journey?
I mean, if you look at the work that we've done, you know, we started off back in 2015, and the whole purpose was, again, to try to solve a micromobility first mile, last mile problem. And we did that with initially doing our partnerships abroad in Europe because it was much easier that way. And then essentially trickling down and localizing our value chain. It hasn't been the easiest of tasks. It hasn't been the easiest of tasks because, again, the environment that we are building this company in is not a conducive environment. And this is a fact. Where we us as a company, I mean, we probably, you know, over the past 8 years have had over 400 rejections from both DFIs and private sector. So when we then carry on looking into our business and growing our business, we're not asking for permission, we'll just ask for forgiveness at some point. So with that being said, had a significant amount of challenges. And the challenges for us, in terms of how we see them, it's not charging. Charging is not the issue. The issue is financing. Financing is the most critical component to any development of any industrial sector. The biggest customer in any country, in any government, is the government itself. So if you have DFIs, again, who are there and meant to support entrepreneurs like myself, being Black, being youth, and we're not getting that support, it makes it difficult to scale. And then it makes it so easy for people, outsiders, onlookers, bench warmers, to criticize us based on what they see and what they assume. But in terms of how we've scaled, we've gone into designing new products like the one here behind me. We've went into developing other products which we haven't shown yet. We've forged new partnerships with local government, such as the GDD. We've went as far as working with the private sector, and we've also scaled our operations where we have a sales arm in Dubai. And the reason why that is that, again, it's much easier to get support from outside than it is from your own homeland. But let me not make this any more controversial. Our methodology, it's an entire waterfall.
I would like to comment on this one.
All right, okay, but Mzinyati, I'll allow you. So with our model and our approach, it's a waterfall effect, and our waterfall effect literally allows us to work on different streams at the same time and have good outputs. It's not sustainable if you don't have sufficient capital. Because again, when we started the company, I remember knocking on doors asking for a mere 5 million and getting rejected, and essentially just raising it myself. So it's been a very arduous journey for us. And the arduous journey has literally been having to start another company, which has been a cash cow to finance our project. And again, you would think that there's a meritocracy that we're operating in, but that's not the case. So, with our methodologies and how we work, I think we've done quite well for a first-owned Black automotive company in the 100 years that the automotive sector has existed. It's not something to be proud of for me to say, because again, it means that there's a systematic problem, there's a systematic challenge. I can throw in one comment in terms of our work and methodologies was also observing historically how innovation has been introduced in this country. You can go back as far as 1834, I think that's 1827 or 1834. That's when the first electric vehicle was introduced in the world. And even when you look at what it was used for at that time, it was used for first mile and last mile. So they have your mom working at home and literally using that EV to go and buy groceries, visit a friend, etc., etc. When that's how the world was at the time. And scaling it to where it is now, 1948 was probably one of the most historical moments in South Africa's history. But 1950 was much more historical because that's when the IDC was created. The IDC itself was created at an interesting and peculiar time, where it was literally mandated to create industries. So like your SASO, ISCO, FOSCO, and all those other industries. But when we look at, how us trying to participate within this economic landscape, again, people like me, it's not easy to even scale out businesses. So we have to keep on reinventing the wheel for ourselves from a financing perspective to scale out businesses. So, again, that's how it's been over the years. We're still growing. We've sold over 150 vehicles globally. I can say that because, again, we've managed to forge different partnerships and exporting our products in its drips and drabs. But then again, it's still not sustainable. So you have a critical conversation which has to be had is what is then the role of DFIs? If DFIs are supposed to champion industries, so they're supposed to champion entrepreneurs like myself to come up and actually participate on a global level, but they're not meeting them halfway or even a tenth of the way, then it's like, what's the whole point? So, it's been an arduous journey, like I mentioned, but it's been great. I'd probably be aging better if I was an entrepreneur, but, we still carry on and we still try to create this industry that never existed.
Thank you very much for that, Fezile, and really, I suppose, congratulations for you for staying the course, because it is really, it's sounding like in Delendlela, but somebody must begin to walk it, and it is really a shame that 100 years of this industry, and we're only seeing companies like yourselves emerging at this point in time. Asanda, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation and maybe some feedback or responses in terms of what Fezile has then just shared, given your broader industry or your broader mandate then as AIDC in terms of transforming the sector.
We transform the industry to the best of our ability. And Fezile is one of the people that have actually benefited into what we're doing. I mean, he can tell you, we met with him through our partnership with ECDC in the Eastern Cape, and through a lady called Colin Siwisa, whereby we formed a partnership and we introduced him to the CSIR, and is currently running a project with the CSIR to develop the e-mobility. I want to defend the South African government and say we are trying our utmost best to ensure that Black entrepreneurs are being taken care of. We might not be doing much, but we're trying our utmost best. We are also working with Uvilo, but it's from the University of Pretoria, together with CSIR, together with Fezile. And we're gonna do these things locally.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Asanda. I think, you know, I suppose it is kind of encouraging that, you know, there are organizations like the AIDC. And I think, you know, how we grow and how we evolve and develop this industry is allowing the different views and hearing from entrepreneurs that are living through what, you know, what the policies or what initiatives are in place, so that we are then able to guide and able to really then, you know, steer all in one direction and in a direction that then really understands or takes into account then the lived experiences of entrepreneurs, but also, you know, recognizing the efforts that are then being made. Nathan, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation, you know, and just building onto what Asanda has spoken about around you know, the work that is being done by AIDC, the comments that have been made by Fezile in terms of, you know, the development of the local industry. And really it speaks to, you know, this just the strategic support that is required then for local industries. And I wanted to hear then from an IDC's perspective, you know, what are some of the strategies that the IDC is implementing currently to support the growth of the electric vehicle industry?
Maybe let me start by just maybe touching on some of what has been said earlier. It's very hard to start a business in South Africa, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have deep pockets, or you don't have investors with deep pockets, or you're not well networked. We're actually seeing that in the what we could call a financing ecosystem. There's a big gap for investments in early stage businesses where hardware investment is required, you know, where you need potential investments in assets, where you're making a product, whether it's electric vehicle or widget, etc. And there aren't, you know, clear offtakes or route to markets, etc. Even though I think there was mention of CSR, there is an innovation ecosystem and a research ecosystem that benefits from funding, whether it's government or third parties or grant funding. Typically, bridging the gap between that and scaling investments, right type of funders are not really existing in South Africa. As IDC, we've tried, for example, to invest in third-party funds where we are limited partners, and funds that align with, strategically align with some of the areas we want to invest in, and try to take a VC approach in terms of supporting some of these businesses. And I think there's more that needs to be done in this space. I mean, it's not just electric vehicles, it's other industries like medical devices, etc., where these gaps exist. And it's something that we could try to address. One way to address that is through JET, which can bring other funders and other investors to the table, essentially. JET project management unit at the presidency, who's overseeing the entire JET program. They've actually created what they call a financing platform, which is used to elevate projects or showcase projects and businesses and to get them in the same room as grant funders and investors that might have the right risk appetite for early stage businesses and projects. So that's one way we could potentially try to address that. I mean, as IDC, in terms of what we're doing, I mean, typically, our investment strategies are focused on either investing in projects or businesses, whether it's existing businesses, startups. But we have taken a value chain approach in terms of looking at industries. And when you do that, you become a lot more aware of the ecosystem that an industry exists in. And electric vehicles are interesting. You have the automotive sector, you have the production of vehicles and the jobs and all of that comes with that. But then you have the adoption side of that and the decarbonization of transportation. And that's completely different. It has completely different drivers. And then you have businesses and private sector as well that need to decarbonize supply chains, for example. So you really need to look at this industry strategically from a segmentation perspective. And that's how we've looked at it. You've got the automotive sector, but then you have the new opportunities. Last mile logistics, long haul logistics, public transport, for example. You have niche applications in mining, agriculture, tourism, like, for example, game drive vehicles. There's then the associated infrastructure, and then there's the components that cut across it. And one of that is the battery value chain. And a lot of these sort of segments have different demand drivers to it. If you think about private sector, particularly in the retail space, they need to decarbonize their supply chain. I mean, they use a lot of trucks, they use a lot of delivery vehicles. You think about e-commerce platforms, for example, and the easy way to do that is through the adoption of electric vehicles. Of course, not without its challenges, but the drivers are slightly different there. Drivers there are shareholder values and ESG, for example, that's driving that adoption. And we're seeing that, happening in the industry as well. And then, there are other investment pathways. For example, a lot of people don't know this, but IDC has a small team that looks at social economy investing, where we just don't look at the pure business case, but we look at the socioeconomic impact. For example, whether it's women empowerment, whether it's creating jobs in townships, whether it's to address spatial inequality. And we've even used some of the funds that sits in that space to invest in e-mobility companies. Like, for example, Green Riders is one of our investments. We provided a social economy investment through one of our funds. And that's an interesting e-mobility sort of case study where they're using e-bicycles and leasing that to unemployed youth, mainly in Cape Town, who are then able to go from earning nothing to earning, upwards of 10 to 12,000 rands per month, doing last mile deliveries for the likes of Uber, etc. And they've created close to, I think, 1,000 jobs in this space, in this sort of last mile delivery market as well. So using all of our capabilities, essentially, when we're looking at the industry from an ecosystem perspective, allows us to try to address some of the gaps in developing this industry. Of course, we can't address all of them, but through partnerships, potentially we can. And that's a lot of what we're doing. I think it was mentioned early on, information sharing and getting the right type of information out there. And you'd be surprised, it's not just the public, but also other institutions, etc. Everyone is not on the same sort of not on the same level. So a lot of institutions not having information, trying to develop partnerships with them and sharing information, for example, about IDC strategy, about JET, etc., almost sensitizes them to this industry and encourages them to look at this industry from an investment perspective. And potentially consider taking more risk in the industry as well.
Thank you very much for that, Nathan. And really touching on key elements, speaking around decarbonization, ESG, the mainstreaming of ESG. I think it really then speaks to sustainability being a very key element in the driving of this industry. And Ndia, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation given that sustainability is one of the key elements that Everlectric has as part of its mission. How do you ensure that the life cycle of your electric vehicles is in fact environmentally friendly, and what steps are you taking to minimize the carbon footprint of your operations?
Thank you so much for that question, and I think it is one that is quite widely asked. So when you look at the life cycle of a vehicle, whether it is an internal combustion engine or it is an electric vehicle, one has to look at three distinctive aspects of that vehicle. The one is the emissions that are produced at the manufacturing of that vehicle. But secondly, it is the emissions during the usage of that vehicle. And then thirdly, it's the emissions at the end of life, right? So, you're asking about the life cycle of the vehicle and how we ensure that all of it is essentially sustainable. I won't touch of end of life emissions because they are quite minimal, whether you're looking at electric vehicles or internal combustion engines, if you're looking at the life cycle. But what we know is that the carbon emissions that are created at the manufacturing of electric vehicles is a little bit higher than those of an internal combustion engine as a result of the processes required to mine and also to manufacture. But when you look at the emissions that are produced when the vehicle is running, those depend on the grid with which you charge that vehicle. So if you look at a market such as Norway, where 88% of the grid is renewable electricity, then one is closer to getting to sustainability. But in South Africa, where we are reliant on a coal-powered grid, emissions coming out of electric vehicles are still much less than those coming out of internal combustion engines. And so when you look at the entire value chain or the entire footprint of an electric vehicle, it will reach break even sooner than an ICE vehicle ever will. So no matter how you're charging your vehicle, to run an electric vehicle is still more sustainable. But having said that, your question was relating to Everlectric and what we are doing. We are ensuring that at that stage where vehicles are being charged, all the electricity that we use in charging our vehicles is actually green. So as far as possible, we will charge off solar, but where we cannot, we offset all the dirty power that we use using renewable energy certificates. And this is something that we are doing in the meantime before we are able to wheel electricity to our chargers as well. So I think, the previous speakers have also touched on it, that it is a long road that we need to walk before, this is fully established. But we have to do what we can in the meantime until we get to that point. So, to your question about sustainability of the process, yes, we purchase renewable energy certificates and we ensure that the electricity that we use in our vehicles is actually designated as green, because that would be coming from a renewable energy source.
Thank you very much, Ndia. And I think, you highlighted the importance then of having the appropriate processes in place and broadly then being able to participate in this industry. And I think what also has come through in this conversation is the need for investment and funding, and the need then, where perhaps if, looking at external funding as well. I'd like to, Winston, just bring you in here. You made the point that Eskom isn't a challenge or the concerns around Eskom and whether or not electric vehicles becomes viable or not is not necessarily a challenge. But what I'd want to understand is, from an investor perspective, how do investors, looking at the current power challenges that South Africa has, do investors need to be convinced to come to invest in South Africa and invest specifically in the electric vehicle industry?
I think maybe just for clarity, 2 quick points before I answer the question properly, and that is that absolutely, I think we can clean up the grid. The grid can get cleaner without any doubt. So driving towards other renewable options, etc., and even just cleaning up the options that we currently have on the table. really would make a difference to using. But I totally agree with what's been said, and that is even using the dirtiest coal-powered electricity, electric cars are still cleaner than petrol cars when it comes to emissions. So from that perspective, and I think a lot of the people do understand that. When we talk about investment, I'd like to just also support what Nathan was saying, and that is, when I explained that we were unable to raise funding for building vehicles, I think what's important is that entrepreneurship is tough. This is not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And I think that's the point I was trying to make, is you've got to understand that a couple of things. One, you've got to be in this for the long term. I've been in this game for more than 20 years now. And yes, I've had 1 or 2 pivots within that, but we've remained diligent on driving this type of business and a related business taking this forward. So I think what entrepreneurs need to understand, it's not something you're going to jump in tomorrow and make money tomorrow. Yes, you may make money and you may be able to survive on it. I've survived on it for many, many years. But the critical thing is that the investors need to see that commitment. They need to see that you're in this not just to make some quick money and to get out, that you're actually in this to deliver and build into an ecosystem. When we could see that we weren't able to raise money, I know why we weren't. It's not easy designing vehicles. I take my hat off to Fezile and would love to have a coffee around the table around how they've achieved some of those things, because it really isn't an easy business. But again, it's not intended to be easy. Entrepreneurship and groundbreaking technology changes are difficult, and you need a very particular type of person for that. And that's where that resilience comes in to drive. It's also, I believe very strongly, it's that resilience that most investors are looking for. Whether those investors are banks, or whether they're angel investors, or whether they're people that are going to be bringing funding that is designated to a particular technology or a particular group of people, or to whatever it is, all of those things are looking for people who are going to drive an industry and deliver, because it is not easy. And I really believe that many times the mismatch for investors and entrepreneurs is that the investor is saying, will they see this through? If this is going to take not just 2 or 3 years, but 5 or 10 years, are they here for the long haul? Are they going to pull it through? Are they going to deliver on this? Are they going to remain committed to the cause? And will we see that coming through? And I believe that's what investors are looking for. And what a lot of entrepreneurs then end up doing is funding yourself to a large degree. Why? Because you've got to prove to people that you're in this for the long term, that you're here to make it happen. And that's where investment starts to follow. I know as Grid Cars, I could see that our first big commitment came when people could see that we were doing this regardless, and we were driving this, and that even when it was going to be tough, we were going to still be there delivering on it. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs need to understand. The IDC is a great funding organization, but they're not there to give money away for free. They're there to give money to people that they believe are going to ultimately give them a return on that money, or that are going to ultimately build a successful business out of that money and turn that money into something productive that is creating jobs, that is building support into an environment. So I believe that that's the things that are there. They're not as concerned about, I said, do we have to fix our power problems? Yes, we have to fix our power problems. Is it the biggest reason why people are not investing into South Africa? I don't think so. I honestly don't. I really believe that people they've got a better understanding of the dynamics of industries and the dynamics of countries, and understanding how these things can be addressed. Our challenge might be there are not enough cars being sold. I have faith that we will sell the cars eventually. It doesn't mean that I should stop my business because we're not selling enough cars, in terms of where that's going.
Thank you very much for that, Winston. Thank you very much for those insights. I'd like to maybe just close off this round of questions, and maybe just hearing from Fezile as an entrepreneur then in the industry, where he has been able to secure some investment in his business, and maybe just in terms of his business model, and what are your plans, Fezile, in terms of expanding on your business and supporting the growth and adoption of your electric vehicles?
Okay, where do I start with this one? There's an earlier comment that was made, and it was about bringing innovation in the country. And I think in terms of, again, our opinion is that bringing innovation in the country does not mean it has to come from abroad. It means it needs to be developed from within. So in terms of growing this particular economic sector, it does not need the West, it does not need the East to develop. It needs the South to literally back itself up. This I liken it to the investment strategies that are taken from the East itself. Let's use China as an example in terms of what they've done over the past 50 years, becoming a global superpower, was literally investing in itself and in its people. And if we don't do that, we may think that to ourselves, that in hindsight, that purchasing products or importing products from abroad is what solves our country's issues, or trying to create or develop this particular economic sector. But realistically, the long term of it as a compounding effect is that it is a negative return on investment. So that's like the first part. In terms of where we're trying to be, where we're trying to go as a company, I mean, we at some point, I think 3 occasions, we were approached by foreign governments and foreigners themselves to literally move and ensconce our IP that we've been developing over the years. And it may look great in hindsight, but something has always just kept us home, over the years. Yeah, it's not been a glorious experience, because again, we could say that the likes of these particular DFIs, that they actually do invest from an early stage perspective in local, but they don't. And again, it then brings an issue which purports what is black and what is white. So this is also another greater challenge which we see. So we then try ourselves, to literally pursue our endeavors, as much as it's literally me taking money out of my pocket and literally carrying on investing in this business. It's probably not going to go on for too long, and we might have to, like I said, ensconce elsewhere. So we've seen, and we'd like to see, in terms of a DFI perspective, such as the IDC, that if they can invest in one early stage, then they should be able to invest in another. We need to start changing our investment philosophies and our approach in everything which is being done. But also never forget that greenwashing is also what is confusing customers. So again, for us, we are not focused. We're not concerned with communication, because the communication is clear when we speak to our customers or clients. Essentially, we focus on everything, applying an actuarial language model, which then brings the actual benefit for these particular customers. So with that, we apply a return on ESG approach within this secret sauce that we've developed. So we're hoping that with time, the development will take place. I mean, we do know that even from a governmental perspective, decision-making takes forever. And we hope that something will trigger a particular change, even from a DFI perspective. One of the critical issues as an SME, which we face, especially when we're trying to raise capital from the public sector, is that them taking forever to respond. I mean, I remember somebody telling me once upon a time in 2018, they said, you'll be lucky if the IDC even gives you funding within the next 4 years. And that is actually what we experienced, and which is then coerced us into going back to our drawing board and developing technology and products for others to literally keep on financing and keeping the lights on. So, we hope that, the value chain approach could be really reinvigorated in terms of this investment analogy which is taken. And, IDC, I think back in 2021, the European Union also gave them about 83 million euros, I think, or more than that, for green financing. And within that financial year, the IDC even said that they did not find enough projects, or didn't find any projects to invest in. And we sat there like, but we've been here this entire time. So how long we'll be here in this country, I don't know, but the value will be lost. If we continually purport in terms of bringing in foreign products, the reality is the actual return on investment leaves the country, the royalties leave the country. We're developing other countries and other ecosystems and not our own. There's a certain shift and change, a mindset that is needed. But we'll still try to remain as patriotic as possible. We'll carry on working with different entities and institutions like the CSR and the AIDC. Again, we've been working on this thing for the past year and a couple of months. It's still taking some time to get the financing. So it also, in that arduous process, it kind of does takes your motivation and goes down a roller coaster that's never going back up. So we do hope that things will change. I mean, we think that South Africa is amazing at writing policies. It's amazing at writing strategies. I mean, the NDP 2030 has been there for years. The Green Transportation Strategy 2050 has been there for years. But in terms of actioning it, it's something that one should actually critically question. I think even with our focus, it's not really within is there enough power supply? I mean, I think for the past 100 and so days, it's been proven that Eskom can be fixed, right? So that's not our concern. Our concern is literally driving the research and development, is driving manufacturing, is driving investment in STEM holistically, which we hope we can be met halfway. So I think that's like, for us, that's what it looks like. I mean, decarbonizing is a conversation that happens, but what are we decarbonizing? If the Earth's atmosphere has 0.04% of carbon dioxide, if we look at the true contributors of the actual emissions that take place globally, Africa is not really a contributor to that. And even if you look at our customers, we're not even selling ESG from a save the planet. We're selling ESG as an actuarial language model, which just applies critical elements that come from the tax system, which is there, that actually supports it.
Thank you for that, Fezile. Clearly quite a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of supporting local entrepreneurs, and it is a bit heartbreaking to think that South African businesses could potentially leave South Africa because they aren't able to be able to build the sustainability within SA. And really maybe just to draw to an end or close out this episode. I think there's been quite a lot that's been shared from our guests. We've heard a lot around challenges that are being faced in the industry. And I'd like to just ask each of our guests to just share some parting shots, just some concluding remarks in terms of the future of EV in South Africa, and one piece of advice that our guests would give either to a policymaker, industry leader, consumer, business, an entrepreneur in business about this transition to electric vehicles. Asanda, if I can start with you, please.
Thanks, Thokozile. As a region, we've got a lot that we can actually do, and we need to look at our mineral resources. If you look into the SADC region, the SADC region is very heavy into the mineral resources that goes into the battery manufacturing. We need to put policies not only for the country, but for the region, because we've got cobalt, we've got all the minerals that go into the battery manufacturing, which is the biggest part of the electric vehicle. Now, we need to have bilateral discussions within the countries, which is the region where they are being mined, so that we don't only export minerals to Europe and then we get products into South Africa. We must mine our own products and develop products in South Africa. The main thing in the electric vehicle is not the battery, but it's the cells. We need to work on that, Winston. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. How do we make sure that we get Black industrialists to invest into manufacturing on those? Because the components are within our land.
Thank you very much for that, Asanda, and really highlighting an important point regarding battery and storage, which we will be unpacking in a future episode of the podcast. So definitely a very key area in the industry and in the broader sector. Nathan, if I could get your concluding remarks.
Look, I mean, I see continued adoption happening, the expansion of applications, particularly given the cost curves are coming down. You're seeing new applications in maritime aviation, and things are moving so fast. I mean, when you have sort of discussions with the hydrogen guys, green hydrogen guys, and what's happening in that space, what we thought of in terms of applications and shared applications 2 years ago, those sort of opportunities have narrowed for green hydrogen, and it can be completely dominated by battery electric applications in the space of 2 years. So we're seeing that continuous evolution happening, and that's at least what I'm seeing. The one thing I'm also seeing is the consolidation of lead firms, where we used to have conversations about, what's the next battery going to look like? We don't know what the battery of 2030 is going to look like. We're seeing the consolidation of that technology within specific lead firms who are dominating global market share. If you think about the Chinese battery companies, the EV companies as well, and we're seeing, at least we're seeing from our perspective, a similar model to what you have with cell phones, where you more or less know which firms are leading with innovation in technology development, and that's going to bring out the new product, and you're expecting the next iteration of those products, but it's being concentrated amongst a few firms, and we're seeing that almost happening already in this space as well. And we're also seeing the technology development sort of splitting between replacing inputs, and mainly because the supply chain has scaled so much, and it's starting to look like, for example, catalytic converters a few decades ago, where a lot of innovation was going into, using different materials other than, platinum or palladium, using rhodium more and those sort of things to bring down the cost, etc. And new product. And then we're seeing the split to new product development happening. But definitely China, I think to some extent, has won the race, but it's not a race, it's a marathon at the end of the day. And it is a marathon for our industry as well. If you think about sort of the long lead times in terms of investment, capital allocation, bringing projects to start of production, and many countries are at different levels. South Africa, to some extent, is at its infancy, although we have the auto industry, and other countries are maturing more as well. In terms of my guidance for policymakers, I think it's important that we don't carry the opportunity costs of not doing anything. As someone mentioned the battery value chain, that's a perfect example of that. We have the minerals in Southern Africa or SADC, and I think it's important that we put all efforts into trying to build out that supply chain. Many OEMs have told us that there are few things we need to attract them to South Africa. One of that is an evidence of a supply chain. The other one is a market, but South Africa is typically a gateway country, given we are export orientated, etc., and we don't have a massive market. And then the other thing is support from government as well. And, with the NEV white paper, and I see recently publications of amendments to the APDP2 incentive policy, which hopefully will provide more support for industry. We potentially need something similar for the battery value chain to support the development of that value chain, because that will have a significant impact in terms of not just investment, job creation, capability development, but also for us achieving regional integration and looking at potentially a hub and spoke regional value chain as well, where we can build out not just from upstream, but also the midstream of the battery value chain, and really bring in new industries to South Africa as well.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Winston, if I could ask you for your concluding remarks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think one of the most important things for me is that we've got to be looking forward with the intent that we want to drive this industry. And I think failure to do this, if we look back at things like load shedding was the the damaging part of load shedding happened 10 to 15 years before we became aware of it, before it became clear to us. When the warnings were on the table, we were 10 years behind, and that was the problem. It's really difficult to shift. And this is the problem that we're going to face in this industry if we're not proactively starting to drive it and engage in the industry. And since everybody's thrown in the batteries, I'm going to pick that and say, it may be too late for us, unfortunately. And that is, if we look at what all the other countries, China committed to batteries in 1996. Okay, that's 28 years ago. They made the commitment to building a battery factory. Us jumping in now, we're right at the tail end. We've got to start driving these things more aggressively. As a country, we've got to look and say, I want to do this, and I know the right thing is to drive forward. If we just take the electric vehicles, and this will be my last point, and that is that with electric vehicles, we've taken the view of, yeah, okay, maybe it's not for us. Well, if it's not for us, then what's going to happen is all that's going to happen, we're going to become users of the rest of the world's products because we have not seen it as being for us. And if we looked at it and said, it is for us, we're going to move heaven and earth to make this happen. We're going to try everything we can to drive this. And we're going to drive it even when it's not clear and it's not popular and there's no clear business cases. We're going to drive this now. That is what puts countries ahead of these things. China's ahead in batteries because they made a decision 28 years ago. This is important. Us making a decision now that batteries are important, you know what? Maybe we're going to get 1 or 2 battery factories started up in this country, but we are never going to be a major player. We've missed that window. We've lost the opportunity. And I'm sorry to say that as bluntly as that. If we want to drive an industry, we've got to lead in that industry. We can't follow. Followers are not the people that succeed long-term in these things. And I think that's the transformation we need within our funding systems, within our government, within our attitudes, is going to have to be to start to look and say, how do we drive this and lead this? How do we take this on aggressively and drive it forward?
Thank you very much for that, Winston. Ndia, if I could please get your concluding remarks.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with Winston. I think we need to, if I had to give advice to a policymaker, I would say we've got fantastic policies, but we need to be moving those things to reality or to actual implementation. We have been left behind, and what we probably still do have in a form of like a competitive advantage is our manufacturing sector. It is this sector which contributes 5%, automotive and manufacturing, which contributes 5%, 4-5% to GDP. Why are we not moving there? Why are we not localizing the production of these? Why are we not thinking about the jobs that could be lost if we don't move quick enough in that regard? So what I would say to a policymaker is, it will look like spurring demand locally if you want to support this industry. It will also look like supporting entrepreneurs such as myself and Fezile, so that we can build these businesses. But we also need to be very deliberate about what we are doing about the jobs and safekeeping this industry.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ndia. Fezile, if I could get your concluding remarks.
So I have about 7 points, very short. So number one is this industry could be easily lost, like how South Africans lost the race when it was the gold rush. So the slower we are in actually financing and investing in our local development, the quicker we are to lose out on an entire ecosystem, which is literally developing and maturing right in front of us. My second point is funding must prioritize locals first. We've seen what has happened. We've seen where DFIs are most likely to swing their capital, which is always to those with deeper pockets. This always happens. It's been happening for years and eons. I mean, I think you'll see that if we don't do this, we truly do miss out on point number one. Number three, STEM must be prioritized, and it must be prioritized from an academic perspective. So this, for me, it goes into our educational system, because again, the true developers of any country or any economy are those who are learning from a grassroots level and are prioritizing their skill sets, so that we don't find a huge skills gap, having to depend on foreigners to help us solve our African problems. The fourth point is we need to launch, Treasury with all the DFIs and maybe DSI and the DTIC itself, they need to launch a stimulus package This particular stimulus package is the same approach which was applied in the US, which pretty much saved Tesla when it was at its breaking point. So we need to have a robust and an aggressive stimulus package which is offered to actual developers of products within this particular space, because again, there is really nothing to lose, because at the same time, they are still losing out on their bad investments. So we need to have that. The stimulus package needs to range between 200 million right up to R1 billion to help people develop these companies. This has happened. It's a continuation. It's no different. For all these companies that I mentioned that were developed from 1950, they never existed before. So again, it should say that keep the same philosophy and actually develop your own countries. My fifth point is we need less localization. Localization has shown of how easy it is to fail at launching something that you saw when you're taking a walk in Europe or when you're taking a walk in China and thinking that the same thing could be applied here. No. Strategies built in the boardroom, down the streets. Number 6, beneficiation must be a priority. Beneficiation goes into the battery cell value chain or battery production value chain, right from mining right up to the actual sales and the recycling of those particular assets. We need to prioritize that because we have all the resources. The West and the rest of the world depend on us. The last point is offtake agreements are not realistic. If this is the core principle to actually investing in local, and we see that we need to do it from an offtake perspective, then we are lost, because the world was not built with offtake agreements. The world was built with belief, and that is what we need to have. If we don't have that, if we don't reconstruct our investment strategies and philosophies, then the policies are pretty much meaningless. So once we can change this, we will start seeing good change.
Thank you very much for that, Fezile, and really helpful points. I think you've really summarized a lot of the concerns and a lot of the challenges that we've discussed in this episode. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Energy Conversations podcast. And I want to thank our guests for sharing their invaluable insights and experiences today. It is clear that the journey towards widespread EV adoption is filled with both challenges as well as exciting opportunities. From the efforts to build essential infrastructure, to supportive policies, to innovation that's happening on the ground with companies like Everlectric, Green Scooter, and Gridcars. The momentum is building for a cleaner and more sustainable transportation future. Today, we continued with our journey to demystify the South African energy landscape and empower ordinary South Africans with knowledge. Join us next time as we continue our exploration. Until then, remember that the power to change the energy future lies within each of us. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining us on the Energy Conversations podcast, powered by Bayaka Infrastructure Partners, an authorized financial services provider, and the African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School. Together, we are committed to empowering communities and fostering meaningful dialogue around the South African energy sector. Remember to subscribe and let's shape South Africa's energy future together.